All right, well, good morning. Not exactly what I was looking for. Let's try this again. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Are you guys tired of SMS? Well, we represent 3 of the biggest carriers, and we're part of a joint venture that includes 4 of the biggest carriers in the US. And we love messaging. We just don't love it for authentication. And we're here to talk about that a little bit more today. With that, quick introductions. This is me, Johannes. I won't hold you responsible for pronouncing my last name. And I'm an AVP at AT&T, but also the general manager of this joint venture between the 4 carriers. We also have...
Hi, I'm Michael Engan. I'm a principal engineer at T-Mobile and representing the Project Verify as one of the chief architects on the service side.
And of course...
I'm Bjorn. I'm part of the Verizon CTO office. I'm also heavily involved in the OpenID Foundation and architect as helping JV with the architecture.
Excellent. All right, jumping right in. SMS is not authentication, right? It's really important. It's obviously ubiquitous. We like that as carriers. We encourage you all to get more phones on our lines. Great for us. Certainly better than email. And it's simple to integrate because there's aggregators that can connect you to the messaging. So from an interface perspective, we also see that it's technically appealing. But I think for the last, decade or so, we all been kind of winking each other and saying, yeah, it's proof of possession. Is it really? So you can't get text messages on other devices? You can't log into web interfaces to check your text messages? You don't get them on your iPad? It doesn't prove possession of that particular device, right? It just doesn't work. It's also easily disrupted. If there's an unauthorized SIM swap, or even if you change your phone number and the service provider doesn't know that the phone number has changed, all of a sudden your connection, it's not just security, all of a sudden your connection to the customer is lost, if that's what you're relying on for password resets or whatever. So this is a real problem. What's Project Verify? So we're going to put an identity solution into the marketplace this year. And principally, it's a mobile app that has very specific carrier privileges. So it can talk to the aspects of the network that are uniquely available to us. And it realizes 3 end-user use cases. The first one is you'll be able to sign up as a service provider and pre-populate a lot of the registration information. And one of the neat parts of that is if the customer gives consent to share the phone number, the service provider then doesn't have to go and validate that phone number. Usually when you get a phone number today, a cellular telephone number today as a service provider, what do? You send a text message and then they get a code and so it's like, okay, and now you know that it's really the cell phone number. If we assert the cell phone number, we checked in the network, we checked with the SIM. We know the phone number. You can just trust it. You can also use it to authenticate, whether that's a primary authenticator. So if you have a low assurance service, you can use us and just get right in. Or you can use us as a second factor and maybe to replace SMS in particular, right? Last use case is an authorization use case. So if you have any transactions that have really high value and you want to know in that moment that it's really that device and that user, you can invoke that authorization flow. The last set of features are wrapped in these trust services. We're still a little bit stealthy on the details there, but it's hopefully pretty exciting because we're going to be able to offer up the service provider some advanced protections. That may be, especially if you're in, let's say, financial services, could be very interesting to attack certain types of fraud. So very excited about that as well. The whole project is not just about the mobile device, but it's turning your smartphone into a master key, a master control point for these use cases. But we will also allow it to interact with secondary devices. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we then basically secure that ecosystem. It's not wide open, but it's pretty exciting because we want us to be able to unlock experiences, not just on that smartphone, but really everywhere. And then obviously we're going to transact with a wide range of services. The last thing that I'll hit on is that the user is in control. This is really important to us. Certainly there's been some not so great press around the carriers and subscriber information. We've been at this for quite some time, and I can tell you that we take privacy very seriously. And we did a lot of things, we'll cover some other architectural aspects, that made realizing this product actually a lot harder, a lot more expensive, a lot more difficult, but it was the right thing for us to do. So the user is in control. This is our consent screen. We will only share data with service providers if the customer, if the consumer has given us express consent, period. They're in control. And so on that consent screen, we'll give clear context. What are you authorizing, or what are you giving consent to? We are validating the service provider. So when you get a text message and says Bank of America or something like that, and you see a message, do you really know it's them? I'm a longtime security professional at AT&T. I don't. Right? It's difficult. So when this application says it's this particular service provider, then you know it's that particular service provider. And by the way, that was in no way an endorsement by Bank of America. Data flow control. You will be able to see that what the actual data points are that you're sharing, right? So you can see all the different attributes that are part of this. So you can check them, and you can actually uncheck some of them and go down into the details and have full control. It's your data as the end user. We are just the custodians, and the way we look at it is we want to basically allow end users to use their data to power these experiences and secure experiences with the service providers. But it's their choice to do so. Right? We're not parental about this. It's the customer. It's all about them. And lastly, again, as I said, it's explicit or express consent. Nothing is implied. There's no secret handshake or contract somewhere with service providers where they just get that data. This is the vehicle. Does it introduce friction? Yes. Is it necessary? Yes. This is how it has to be. In 2019, there is no other way to approach this, in my view. All of that will get you, obviously, the SIM credential, some unique things that we can do within our network. Right? We have the SIM infrastructure, so hardware crypto, but we also have the radio towers. We can discern all kinds of risk signals that are unique to us and that we, even federally mandated, can't just go ahead and share. But we can bundle these things and productize them in a way that we think we can make some meaningful difference. And these trust services we're very excited about. And as I mentioned, these verified attributes, very exciting. With that, I'll hand to Mike.
Thank you. So it wouldn't go very far if you had to code to each carrier. So the goal here is there's a single interface, single SDK that you're going to code against. The service provider is making a request. And that, for the simple example, is going to originate on a phone, whether you're an app or a website. There's a joint venture owned by the 4 carriers that are currently in the group. And that is responsible for the discovery and routing. So based off of signals from the phone, we will then route that request to the correct carrier. The correct carrier then is the only one who sees the subscriber, right? So the carrier will then take care of all of the consent capture, the sign up, the authentication, the authorization, and all those trust signals and services straight back out to the service provider. So the joint venture only sees the initial routing request. And then the service provider gets its response regardless and seamless of which carrier that came from. I won't step you through the whole architecture call flows. I'll give you guys a minute to take photos. For those familiar with OIDC, this is OIDC. Whether you're an app on the phone or a website on the phone, you're going to get caught with the universal link to get into the correct carrier's application. There will be 4 carrier apps in the App Store. They'll be preloaded by your carrier on Android, downloadable on iOS, as well as your gray market Android devices. The joint venture is responsible for that discovery leg. And so for those familiar with OIDC, it's, and Bjorn will cover that in a little bit more detail. The service portal and the back-end replication of service provider data in the background. All right, everybody got their photo? Okay, I'll hand over to Bjorn.
So as Mike said, there is a common way for a service provider to get onboarded. So when you deal with MNOs, in this case, you have one-stop shop on how you get onboarded as a service provider. So as Mike mentioned, data will be replicated to all the carriers. It's transparent to the service provider. And so the service provider will be a customer of the joint venture. That's how they get their onboarding, and that's how the discovery function will work. As I said, the details are replicated to carriers, transparent to the service provider. And so this is really a developer-focused approach, the way that the clients, the SDK has been designed across the operating system, platforms on the device, and the tools that we provided.
Before you move on, this is really key because we, obviously, we'll talk more about the distributed nature and all of that, but we didn't want service providers to come in and have to onboard separately with each carrier, right? That would be super annoying. So while the subscriber data stays with the carrier, and that's what I was saying earlier, it's a more difficult distributed architecture to achieve. It would have been a lot easier to centralize it, but that would have in fact created kind of a super aggregation point that we were not interested in. So the subscriber data stays with the individual carriers, but the service provider definitions and the onboarding practices and all of that, the guides, the developer eco support, all of those things are going to be in this service provider portal. So it makes it very easy in one place for them to go.
Yeah. I have another point I can add. As you can see here, we're replicating client IDs. So as a service provider, you're going to get one client ID that'll work on all the carriers that are participating here. We don't want to replicate secrets. Clearly, that would be insecure. So we're switching all of this over to the OIDC client registered keys. So this will all be signed transactions.
Very good.
So I mentioned discovery. So as you saw on the picture, the overall architecture, we are leveraging OpenID Connect, and the discovery is based on the Moderna discovery profile. So we have a method for doing discovery on your primary phone. So the Moderna discovery profile defines a couple of options that you can use as part of your request to the discovery service, in this case hosted by the JV. And so in our case, we are using the MCC MNC out of the Moderna profile. We also have options using IP address or cookies if it's not available to get the MNC MCC. And also what Johannes was talking about, we have secondary devices. So we have ways for binding those secondary devices to the user, and whether you're on Wi-Fi or what have you. Do you want to go into details of how you do that, Mike?
No, I think we'll save those details for partners that start connecting.
Okay.
I think.
Anything here?
Yeah, I know Johannes likes to describe the setting up of these secondary devices. We don't want to create a spam vector, right? We don't want a malicious user on the other side of the country to be able to hit a website, type in your phone number, and my mom wakes up in the middle of the night and she's kind of trained herself to click OK on everything, right? And so there's very much a process that users will go through to set up what are referred to right now as trusted devices. So it's not a AAL set of trust, but it's a device that is allowed to generate a request that will wake up your phone.
I like to call it Pokemon Go. So you kind of capture the different devices, and then those devices are allowed to communicate with Project Verify. But that's critical to us. So this is, if you're thinking about it, the word is trust, right? And so we're talking about service providers needing to trust the users, right? And the users needing to trust the service providers and us facilitating the connection. And in order for this to happen, you don't want rogue devices getting in and being able to spam our application with requests. That's really what Mike is talking about. So if you have that Project Verify app and all of a sudden somebody else is able to trigger something, and then you get these requests for authentication or authorization. Even if you catch it, it kind of starts shattering your confidence in the solution, right? Yeah. So even if the control works, you're going to get annoyed, right? Just like you're getting annoyed when you're getting yet another phone call from an area code you don't recognize, or even a local area code. It's actually more dangerous these days, right? Because they know where you are. But this is a way that we want to instill confidence and create a trusted ecosystem. I think that's what customers are really looking for. I think that's what service providers are looking for. Frankly, everybody, because we're all kind of tired of every second of the day somebody seems to try to scam you some way. And we want to bring some peace of mind to that ecosystem.
Yeah, so I point out here, it's important that we're not asking for the phone number. So even again, if you have hijacked the phone number, that is of no use. And as Johannes mentioned, the Pokemon Go, you're doing this by logging into your app, to your Verify app, in order to add devices. And so you ensure that the right user is actually adding their devices to their account.
Yeah. We know there's a lot of phishing attacks out there, for instance, where the SMS channel, the phisher calls mom and says, hey, you want a $500 Toys R Us gift card, I'm going to send you a PIN. And sure enough, mom verbally says, oh, here it is. And so in this case, in order to set up these bindings, you have to open up that app. You're being told, enter this PIN that you're seeing on this site, or that process to set up that binding. And so it's a lot harder for those phishing attacks to get through.
It's pretty amazing. Any fraud people in the room? There you go, a couple at least. So you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, people are falling for callers telling them they have to pay back taxes with iTunes cards, right? Like, there's almost no limit to what people will agree to do. So we're going to try our best to help with that.
Yeah.
And so this has to do with the porting, right?
No, well, this one is the identity. So what you're going to get. So as a service provider, this is OIDC. So you're going to be capable of getting a user info. And of course, with user consent, our first version of the product is going to have some basic information. There's going to be a subscriber ID. You'll see information on the level of authentication that we've secured for you. Contexts for those that are interested in the authorized flow, being able to show people, tweet-sized strings of something they want that user to visually see and approve, as well as just basic data attributes, name, zip code, email, phone number. And as Johannes mentioned earlier, when you see the phone number from us, it's the phone number. Yeah, I mean.
One of the things I really love about this is you can use the power of the carrier, the SIM, the network, but you don't actually have to ask for the phone number. And for some service providers, if they use us for registration, they may intentionally not want to ask for that because customers might say no. So if you have, for example, a free-to-play game, and you want to get them hooked and then later on try to get them to a premium tier for pay, which is pretty much now the gaming model, right? You don't want to, in the beginning, ask for all that information because the customer doesn't know you yet, right? So you want to go through it, just link yourself. But now you have an awesome authenticator. You have linked yourself to the power of the carriers, but without having to have asked for that information and going through this SMS stuff, right? You don't need that information. Later on, when the subscriber upgrades to a premium tier, you actually can come back to us and get the additional consent. So then you can ask for, the phone number, name, and whatever else. So it enables the whole flow, especially for those services, right? Like all of us do this and go into the app stores and just browse and say, oh, here's a recommendation. This looks like a neat app. It's probably even from a company you've never heard of. So this allows them to hook themselves in from an authentication standpoint, so it's secure and something you can even use across devices, right? And then later on, as you progress at the service provider side as a customer and become like part of a premium tier, you can ask for additional information and the customer can consent to that. I think it's very powerful and it allows for all the kind of organic ways businesses are approaching customers today.
For the spec geeks in the audience, Don't worry, I count myself among you. The subscriber ID is a pairwise identifier. It's pre-pended with the MCC MNC. So that means that the first 6 digits of that user ID is actually an indication of the carrier. So this is designed to be able to expand beyond the first 4 US carriers from the start. Anything else?
Now we're going to.
Well, so again, as Johannes mentioned, we do have the trust services, and so the trust service events are risk events for those of interest, and then as well as the verified attributes. There's been some mentioning about NIST SP 863-3 in some of the conversations here. It's worth noting that we adopted the 63B concept of AL. So when an SP asks for an authentication, they will actually not use the LOA, but the AL type of in the request. And also you see there's identity assurance level. So we will be able to support IL as well. In terms of the attributes, we're still working through the semantics for it. But NIST has done some work on some of the possible schemas that can be done for how you verify, what you can convey for verified attributes. And there's also some work within the OpenID Foundation in terms of identity assurance and how you code this into an OpenID Connect request. Porting. Now we're getting into porting. So, so when you have an account and with a carrier, you are able to take that account with you as you move your service to another service provider within Project Verify. And so within the Moderna working group, we had defined a spec for account porting because it was a requirement from the Mobile Connect community of supporting account porting. And so we're using that concept and what was defined for when you do decide to switch, that we use an AKA indicator to include a signed token by the old OP or the carrier in this case as part of the communication to the new carrier so that they know where the subscriber came from. So as part of discovering that they're not part of the old OP anymore, the new OP will know where the user came from, and it's a signed port token from the old carrier.
So this is a great technical description of a really core principle, again, that we incorporated here. Because when we first started announcing, even at last year's Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, I mean, there were obviously a lot of snarky remarks about, oh yeah, this is a stickiness play by the carriers. I'm here to tell you, actually, I know what it costs to do these things, right? These are actually some of the hardest features we implemented, and it makes sure that the identity is yours as a user. You're not locked in with the carrier. You can switch and take your identity and your relationships with you. We're not trying to keep you locked into any one of our contracts. That's not what this is about. It's really about trying to solve this problem. And I think if you think about it objectively, it's kind of sitting back. Everybody was already using our technology with SMS. It's not designed for this. And in fact, there's even some bad press out there and like, why is SMS not solving my authentication problems? Because it's a messaging protocol, right? That's why it's not solving that problem. It's not designed for that. But on the other side, and we've been at this now for quite some time, we decided to say, okay, the market clearly likes our services on our devices as a ubiquitous way. Why don't we create a product that actually is built for this, right? So this is like, take yes for an answer. This is what we're trying to give you, right? This is what really everybody's been looking for, I think. And there are some very unique capabilities and strength that we have as carriers that we can bring to bear to make this a meaningful new entrant. Now, there's no silver bullets in this. And I think there's enough of us, and I recognize many of you, seasoned professionals in this space that know there's no silver bullet. But I think this is meaningful progress that we're trying to help with.
Yep. One subtlety here that you may notice, you should avoid making the phone number the key that you bind to. Today with SMS, you bind to a phone number and then you get hit every time that phone number changes. You can keep a hold of the phone number. You may want to message those users as well, but really the binding you should be setting up is against the subject ID. And so as you see a user port carrier to carrier, you can see with the signed chains that the subject ID is correctly changing or not. We are unfortunately under FCC mandates that make porting of the phone line incredibly easy for users, which made it incredibly easy for fraudsters. And so the users will have a separate process to dictate whether or not they want to port their identity. And that way we can gate them and authenticate. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg. If we can demonstrate this system works well, we'll be able to go back to the FCC and ask to gate porting off of user authentication at the old carrier. Today, that's mandated, we can't.
That's an excellent point. So Project Verify is not vulnerable to SIM swaps because we have additional credential layers on top of it. So even if a fraudster successfully SIM swaps, they have not hijacked your identity. There are other things that then still need to happen before we allow somebody to provision the Project Verify with that identity on a new device. That's really important. Again, in SMS, if somebody fraudulently does a SIM swap, they immediately get all the text messages, right? And we know from a timing perspective, the second they do that, if they have other credentials, for example, banking passwords, right? Now they have the text message. It takes minutes before they conduct the fraud that they're intending to do. So this is really important to us as well. We don't want the SIM swap to mean, as Mike is saying, is we actually think that in the future, this could be a meaningful control to prevent the SIM swap to begin with. And believe us, as carriers, we would like nothing better. We don't enjoy our services getting disrupted and having bad customer experiences. So I think chicken and egg is the right way to think about it. But we want to start with identity first, because I think that's where the most risk is for the end user, for our subscriber. So we protect them first, and then we try to expand that and work with the government to see, from a regulation perspective, whether or not we can put some additional security controls into that process. But Mike is absolutely right. The guidance we have right now is that we have to make it very easy for somebody to walk into another carrier store and say, switch me over. And unfortunately, that bar is just a little bit too low in order to prevent those kind of issues.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because some of the feedback that I received is that, okay, I hijacked your phone account, and now all of a sudden I have access to all your identity and whatever RPs that you're registered with, and I can just go haywire. Again, it's a very important point, that the bar is a bit higher for your identity, and the fact that we're plugging the hole for the SMS insecurity in terms of, as it relates to authentication, is a very important point. And porting is part of that mechanism and how it prevents that hole.
All right. Now to the
Questions from the audience?
questions and audience section, and then we'll decide what we can answer.
Okay, let's give it a second. I think Andy is going to walk around with a microphone.
All right.
Hey, Steve Wilson from Constellation Research. That is fantastic. It's one of the best things I think we've seen for a long time. What you do?
Let me just enjoy that moment for 1 second. All right, go.
Yeah, Hannes, can you expand on what you mean by friction being a good thing, and exactly where the friction is and why you're...
Oh, sure. You know, many of the service provider conversations we've already had in stealth mode, there is a lot of anxiety around us introducing a screen that is in our application in the middle of that flow, that consent screen, right? That informs the customer and makes sure before we as carriers release our customers' data to anybody, right, that the customer themselves see what's being released and consent to it. Clearly that's friction. Clearly that's good. Again, you know, because it's a change, and change is hard, we understand the anxiety, and so we're investing, again, a ton of money in making sure the user experience is one where the service provider brand doesn't get lost, We get it. Like, I just yesterday reviewed countless new designs on how to make that even better, because we don't want to lose sight or let the customer lose the fact that they're interacting with a service provider, and we're really just a means to an end. But we're not doing this without the subscriber's consent. So that friction is kind of table stakes for us. And so that's what I meant with introducing friction, but it's good friction because it puts the user in control.
Hi there.
Great
My
question.
name is Anand. I'm from Electronic Arts. So I think the use case which you talked about very much applies to us. I have lots of questions, but I will ask few of them so that I can allow others to ask.
Connect to us separately too.
Yeah,
We'll follow
I'll
up
connect
for
to
sure,
you.
man.
So one of the major concerns is the SMS cost, right? So what is the business model you have? Once you have that, I'm not quite sure about the actors. When you say service providers,
Yeah.
does that mean the app itself, like Electronic Arts would be the service provider, or is it?
The service
Apple?
provider is the business, the service that the user is trying to interact with. And we
So
are a
the
means of
electronic-
securing
so
and
the
connecting.
Game,
Yeah.
the game, the app itself.
The game,
Yeah,
the
game,
financial
the
service, the
relying
bank,
party, the-
whoever. And we'll,
So what's
yeah.
the business model? I mean, is there, so does that cut down my SMS cost completely? I mean, is that true?
We're not using SMS in this. So
Right.
the SMS costs are out of this product. What we are doing is, again, stealth mode, so I can't release anything more specific that what I'm about to say, but the end user, it's obviously free. The subscriber, it's obviously free.
So for the game, it is
The
free.
user doesn't have to pay anything to use this capability with
user
us.
doesn't have to
Yeah.
pay, but the business
The
might.
service provider, there is going to be kind of a free tier because we're very serious about helping to secure the ecosystem. But there will be some capabilities that go deeper into those trust services that actually cost a non-trivial amount just to even build and go into the carrier networks, right? So what we're doing is we're using some of our most precious data to basically create some of those capabilities and protect the entire digital ecosystem, right? That's non-trivial. So some of those trust services, and you can go maybe, can you go back to the slide with the 4 boxes? I don't know if you can go up there again. It's easier to show that way.
Yeah, I think for a game app, you're not looking for high IL. You may not be looking for fraud signals. If you're just looking for basic authentication, confirmation that it's the same subscriber ID,
We haven't
They're
released
looking
pricing yet.
for
Yeah.
pretty much everything. Fraud and cheats are so.
So look for the pricing, but the service providers will have to pick up some of the costs, and it's extremely valuable. So I would say that the amount of friction and fraud and malice they can offset, our pricing is going to be fairly compelling and modest. In fact, I want to design it in a way that any service provider will regret if they don't onboard it because it's such a compelling offer, right? And so that's definitely part of our business model. And there are going to be, even for the service providers, there are going to be free use cases. Where that line of demarcation is, we're still defining. I'll give you an example. It might be that a use case is free for a new startup service provider, right? And they can use that use case, but then an internet giant comes along and they push millions of transactions a day through our system. So maybe they should pick some of the operational costs, right? Yeah. Yeah, we haven't released the price list or any of that yet. So once we announce that, we can go through the details.
I mean, it's
But you understand, I answered the business model part though, right? End user free, service providers in some cases.
I mean, it's worth mentioning today, we have third parties that use carrier data for financial fraud use cases, and it's proprietary APIs that cost to maintain. This architecture is based on standards. It is not configured to favor any third-party aggregator as it is today. It is open for any service provider, whether they're all the existing aggregator or a new service provider, to come in for the same door. Again, it's a standards-based, and it's a lower cost of ownership than what we do today.
And just to qualify that a little bit further, based on our experience as carriers, or especially over the last couple of years, this requires the relationship to be directly with the service provider, unmediated. So we're not, just since you use the word aggregator, we're not sending this or connecting this to the aggregators that then can relay that information. If the aggregators want to work on behalf of a particular service provider and help them onboard to us, that's perfectly fine. We're not dictatorial on what technology that service providers use. But we will know and vet the service provider, and we will know exactly where this data goes, right? So we're not going to allow a service provider that gets our data to relay that data to other parties. That's not going to be allowed. We're really trying to control this ecosystem, and we have found that in some cases, unfortunately, others have not been good custodians of our subscriber data. And those brands usually are not in the news. We are. And so we're taking this very seriously. This is like at the chairman level of all 4 carriers. We're doing this express consent. And we are going to know the service provider that wants this data. There's no guessing around that.
Yep. Another question.
Kelly Robinson.
Hey, Kelly.
How does this work, or does this work with international numbers, and what happens when a U.S. Individual is roaming?
Well,
Yeah. Oh.
I'll start, and then you can go into details. First, there are now dual SIM phones. So if you are international, I encourage you to still go and get an AT&T SIM in your phone. So that would be the starting point. The technology also works via Wi-Fi, very similar to Wi-Fi calling. So because we have unique carrier privileges on the device, we can interact with a SIM, and we can conduct the call flow even when you're on Wi-Fi. So we can use the secret embedded in the SIM and that whole AKA thing. We can do that over a RAN, or a radio access network. Yeah. So you could be in another country, and you can still authorize those things and allow your kid to, order a pay-per-view movie or something like that.
But it doesn't work for international numbers?
Not yet. So
We are working
in the
with
audience,
GSMA
yeah,
on the
no,
standards
in
on
the
how to
audience,
make
is,
that
say hi, Sanjay. Wave to the people. Hi. He's GSMA, and so we are already in conversations with a lot of carriers. Our thought process is there's a lot of global interest. There are actually also global markets that have already launched similar things. If you look at South Korea, I'll plug my friend Andy a little bit. SKT has launched something like this, and they have over 30,000 service providers. Done an amazing job. Their carrier authentication app in the App Store is the #1 app in the finance category. So the authentication app by the carrier scores higher than any of the banking apps, because you can't transfer money in South Korea or make meaningful transaction without invoking that. And guess what that has done to fraud? It's just a smart play, guys. It just is.
Yeah.
Hey, good morning. Question about subscribers who are part of a corporate or a group plan. How does Project Verify account for those scenarios?
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
He was asking about different subscriber classes. So
sure.
there is scope within each carrier for how they're going to handle different accounts. We know government accounts, for instance, have a lot of restrictions on what services carriers add over the top. So there will be some classes of users. There may be some MVNOs and things like that where initially it won't work for those users, and there's error responses. So you'll get an error response code, an OIDC error to tell you of that. And as those various partners start agreeing that they like this service, well, we can turn it on for them.
So you kind of just mentioned it, but will the MVNOs be supported, and also the name and information that comes back will be the information of the account holder, or will kids and other family members be able to provide?
Yeah, very much. So every phone number in the country is the goal of being able to get to support. All the initial testing is going to focus on the 4 major brands and the 4 major labels. We have architecturally design capabilities to support the MVNOs. Whether individual MVNOs, it's going to be up to how they're connected to their parent network. And at what point they come on board, whether an MVNO has to use their parent network's app to do the authentication, or whether the MVNO gets its own signed version of the app to do that processing we'll work out with each MVNO.
We were fairly pragmatic and from the go-to-market perspective, so we wanted to focus on the 4 big ones that can actually help bankroll this effort as well, frankly. But the goal is ubiquity in terms of MVNOs. So we definitely want this to be available to any subscriber in the US on any network. Every single subscriber. So
question really quick.
Yeah, so the question was whether family members are included. So we have one of the premium signals that we're working on under those services is the IAL, the trust services, thank you. And so a family member may have a lower IAL, but we would still be able to serve their information. And the goal here is today, through existing channels, you may find, the primary account holder's name or the primary account holder's address. My mom is on my billing account. She has a different address, and the goal here, she will be able to define her own address. It might be a lower IAL than mine, but it'll be there.
Three questions on this side. All right. Hey, Don.
Hi, Johannes, you said that you're going to know and vet the service providers. Have you given some thought to how that's going to be implemented, or does that imply a certification program of some kind?
Yeah, we've given it lots of thought, and once we have that NDA signed, we'll talk about that. It's a great question. It's one of the right questions to secure that ecosystem, so looking forward to it.
It's worth noting that we will have a trust framework in place for these services to define the role of each party in this. It is true that we've given some thought to the vetting and certification of RPs, and also how we deal with removing RPs that are not living up to the agreement. But
Hey guys, thanks for the presentation. As a consumer, it's really refreshing to see you guys collaborating and developing solutions like this, so that's great. My question is, so it seems to me that what you've designed for, I can see it working for a consumer use case. What about for enterprises that may have enterprise class IDP products like a Ping or an Okta? Do you see any sort of integration opportunities, either in the short term or long term?
Absolutely. And so we will also be launching an enterprise product that uses the same technology, but it's going to be positioned differently. I can't say too much about it yet, but I think it's going to be exciting. And since we're at an identity conference and there's probably a whole bunch of vendors here, we're not trying to enter the market and become an IAM suite, right? That's not going to be what we're doing. I skipped over that in my intro, but I'm actually responsible for all identity at AT&T, which includes enterprise identity. And I've done this for quite some time, so I know how hard it is. And so we're going to position the product so you can get the capabilities, but integrate it with your existing technology. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Because frankly, even just from an adoption perspective, if we had to go to all the enterprises from the very large to SMB and say, hey, you need to get rid of your IAM suite, at AT&T, if somebody came to me and said that, I would say no thanks, right? So we have to have a smart way of introducing it, but we're absolutely focused on that, and we think it has tremendous value in the enterprise space.
So following up on this enterprise identity question, are there any hooks going to be available for advanced AAL for enterprises that want to use better level of assurance for authentication?
That is an excellent question.
Yes, so right now the expectation is...
Mike, that was my answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a great presentation. So is this the US version of Mobile Connect then?
Is this the US version of Mobile Connect?
Yeah.
It is not, but, and again, Sanjay from GSMA is sitting here and I'm hoping I answer this the right way. But, look, GSMA and a lot of the global carriers, but also others, and I see Jeremy sitting there, sorry for calling you out, used to be with NIST and set up NSTIC, where we did some trials in the US. So there's been a lot of work that helped get us to this place and helped also the carriers believe that we can succeed in this place, right? And so Mobile Connect has been a great effort, and they created a framework where we strategically differ slightly, though I think we're starting to get in real alignment, is that we felt compelled to build a product, not a framework. And we felt that it shouldn't be up to the carrier and the market to implement it the way they want to implement it, but that what the marketplace was really looking for is a specific product. We've been working with GSMA and stay connected every step of the way. Look, we demoed it in Barcelona at Mobile World Congress. We're getting great support from GSMA. They're also helping us connect to the global operators, right? But I would say that if you think of Mobile Connect as an umbrella and a framework, we will be underneath that umbrella, but we are going to insist that it's a product and some very specific branding. So it's very clear that if somebody implements our technology, they're adhering to all the things that we presented today, including the level of security and the level of transparency with the customer. If somebody wants to do something other than that in another market, they're welcome to. And that might fall under Mobile Connect, but it won't be what we are doing.
It's worth noting that this solution is OpenID Connect compliant, just like Mobile Connect. We're using same or similar authenticator that Mobile Connect has specified to do this. And so there's some details that are different. But as you said, Johannes says, Mobile Connect will be an umbrella over this. And so from the outside, for a global perspective, it could look like Mobile Connect. Now, that hasn't been the initial focus, because we focus on North America and getting a product to the market. And so, as Johannes said, we continue to work with GSMA to see how this fits in, how this would work in a global setting.
Yep.
One more
Sure.
follow-up. I think it's great that you're taking accountability for privacy, especially with some of the incidents that have happened with intermediaries.
Yeah.
How do you see it scaling out, right? Like large enterprises can come to the carriers, but do you see pretty much all the disintermediaries go away, or where?
Are we talking about the B2E solution, the enterprise solution?
No, B2C, right?
B2C, okay.
So if I'm a e-commerce shop,
Yeah?
do I have to now come to the carrier for this, or can I work with my existing service provider, right? It may not be the same intermediaries, but is there going to be an ecosystem to enable direct contract relationships?
That's an excellent question. And actually, one of our areas of focus, we actually ourselves feel increasingly apprehensive about being in stealth mode. And so we're going to roll this out to the developers first. I mean, we're already working with some, again, under NDA, right? But we really want to bring this to the dev ecosystem, and not just to the individual service providers, but also the companies that help them, the companies that sell them IAM solutions, and make this as plug and play as possible, right? I think that's a very meaningful step in ubiquity. And sometimes as carriers, we are like overly stealthy, right? And overly conservative in releasing this. And I think in this case, we're going to pay a lot of attention to the developer ecosystem and all the stakeholders, so not just those that represent the actual service providers, but also all the other companies that make this happen, right? We're very excited about that, both on the consumer side and on the enterprise side. As I said, I think that's how we do it, right? Like we work with the existing IAM vendors. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Do we have any?
You've discussed the functionality for end users to link secondary secondary devices. Is there similar functionality for secondary identities / personas, where I have the phone, it's mine, but I also have a work persona and I also have a gamer persona?
We're exploring that, and so
Yeah.
I think there's been some meaningful announcements by others that allow even some obfuscation techniques, right? And I think that's very interesting. I mean, Mike, you want to?
Yeah, so the first version of the app is very much based off of a SIM authentication. So as a service provider, you're getting a guarantee that both the device has been authenticated and the user has been authenticated with every transaction. So when it comes to primary phones, it's clear that you're identifying that one user. We have to tread carefully at the API standard level when we start deciding that a tablet is shared, because now the signal that says we've strongly authenticated the device, but now there's two different users that have that device. And so We just have to make sure it's not easy for a malicious user to take your device and show up as another user on that device. And but
we're running out of time, but that's actually, to me personally, a very interesting question because we've been toying a lot with that. So if you don't mind connecting with me via LinkedIn or reach out to me, and we can continue talking about it, I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
We've got our last question over here.
We got one more, yes.
Oh.
Hi, you talked about the opaque identifier and the gaming use case. Can you clarify, is the idea that as a game I can get access to that identifier before consent and later do consent to do extra steps, or is it only consent before you can get any identifiers?
That's right. So the consent, the initial consent is to just even link to us, even if you're not getting any real attributes other than the opaque identifier. Even that requires consent, right? And then later on, when you actually want verified attributes and that, then you have to basically re-invoke and get the incremental consent. So consent is necessary just to establish the link. We don't let a service provider in unless the subscriber says so. But the initial consent in that gaming use case would basically potentially include no attributes other than that opaque identifier, so that game can use us to authenticate, right? And then later on, when you pay $9 per month or whatever, and you want to upgrade and you want verified attributes as a service provider, you can send them back to our customer and then ask for the additional consent. Make sense? Cool.
Thanks for the great questions. If you have more questions, feel free to come up and greet the panelists afterwards. I want to thank the panelists. This has been a phenomenal session. I think one that many people will be watching the video afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.